The Psychic Society, Chapter 1. Who is James Perry? That's a complex question. To you, James Perry is a terrorist, a man who went on a killing spree that included one president, two presidential candidates, and a majority of House representatives, and also several others who stood in his way. I call him an American patriot who saw a failing system led by spineless, principleless snakes, and he mercilessly struck them down. Potato, potato. But perhaps you want a more complete view of the man you call a terrorist. At the crux of his situation, as I'm sure you can attest to given your fancy attire, the lack of money in his family was of great consequence. James Perry was born to Arthur and Millie Perry on August 6, 1960. Birthed right behind him, 5 minutes later, was a twin sister. She was a little smaller than him. Doctors were unaware that she was even there. But the major problem for the Perry family was at that moment they were now taking care of two children. One was going to be tough, but two had not even been on the table until that day. It's very easy for elected officials to make rules for everyone, as well as give themselves higher than average salaries and furniture allowances, when they don't see the real suffering that they bring on with their leadership. They were dutifully elected to protect the interests of the people, and as years went by, they created more laws and more tax codes that bettered their own lives and crippled regular citizens. Creating laws that made it illegal not to have insurance, for instance. Reagan's trickle-down philosophy works in theory, but when a large portion of the world's wealth is tied up in trust funds, it doesn't seem to trickle down at all, now does it? Maybe from heir to heir, monarchy to monarchy, business to politician. People work hard to get so little, and the new monarchy can't even be bothered to read a bill. Instead, they push it through with lots of earmarks and extra pork that has nothing to do with the bill's title. And that's that. The end. Slavery hasn't died in this country. It's just called civil duty. Wow, that was a tangent. Even in death, my master's will is surprisingly strong. Let's get back to it. James Perry grew up in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. His father was a mechanic and his mother was a store clerk. They made enough to get by. Luckily for Arthur Perry, his father started his mechanic business when he turned 18 and eventually opened up a garage where he serviced vehicles for the neighborhood. Arthur joined him after serving 3 years in the military and became an accomplished mechanic, even opening up his own garage. He taught James a lot about cars and how they worked, but James always wanted to be a writer. He wrote a lot of fiction in high school, much of it unpolished, he admitted, and he decided to go to college to pursue an English degree. He believed it would be enough to get him a job and allow himself to write in his spare time. He took out a loan, same as his sister, when she went to college, fully expecting a decent job upon graduation. Everyone told him if he wanted to succeed, he needed to go to college. He listened to that and took it to heart, believing the American dream was in his grasp. It was 1982 when he graduated college. The country was recovering from the energy crisis, and James struggled to find a job that would pay him what he was worth, or at least what everyone told him a degree was worth. Some companies told him he didn't have any experience, so they were moving on to other candidates. Others told him he was overqualified for the position. He worked for a fast foods restaurant in the evenings and a superstore in the mornings. He kept it up for several years, applying for jobs, being rejected, and continued to work these two jobs. He loved going to interviews. It says on your resume that you've been working for Supercenter for 5 years. Why do you want to leave them? You must like it there to stay for 5 years. James did not know how to answer that. Would it have been professional to shout, "It's the best I can do because no one will hire me"? Still, even better, when he would vent his frustrations, people would tell him he should not have taken out a student loan if he couldn't pay it. Everyone told me that I needed a college degree to succeed in life. You should have done more research instead of listening to what others told you, they told him. He hated himself for ever trusting anyone in the first place. The same people he looked up to have all the answers, lied to him. He decided it was time to start his own research. He was looking for ways to correct the system. He saw the education system was too expensive, and the return on investment was too low. There was no necessity anymore for a college degree if no one was willing to pay you for your education. But part of the issue was that the government started backing these loans. So banks gave them freely to 18-year-olds seeking their bachelor's degree in pottery. Schools took full advantage of this situation and charged more than was necessary for their programs. They paid college professors more and added new wings. They cannot be completely blamed for the situation. Why would they not take advantage of it? So they did. The young paid for it, believing it would lead to better jobs and better pay. They lied, and no one is willing to take responsibility for it. I, personally, did not go to college. All of these frustrations flow from the mouth of my master. Do tell, Kraus, what do you know about the ether? It is everywhere. It is God, it is thought, it is substance. We walk through it. Some of us noticed. But what is it to you? You're not psychic. You simply obey the dollar, not the higher call. It is as plain as the suit you wear. Get on with your story. What does any of this have to do with anything? Said Kraus. It is a beginning, the creation of a terrorist. What was it you hoped to find from me? How? How was James Perry able to do what he did? I am under the impression he could fly and shoot senators from blacked out windows. Oh, yes, that did happen. That is a good place to start, since it was the very first act that James did as the Spectre. That day was a nice one. Washington Hilton Hotel stood resolute in the afternoon sun. Are all the fluffy words necessary? Well, if someone wants to read this book later, maybe they'd be interested in all the fluffy words. Or perhaps they'll just skim and get to the good parts. Create your own adventure, you know? The entrance flooded with cars picking up guests and dropping them off. Typical view for such a lovely building, 10 stories high, with a large egg-shaped garden in the entryway. Sweet scents of daffodils filled the air. Of course, you don't care about daffodils, so I will continue on with the story. A black Buick pulled up to the entrance and dropped off a well-dressed gentleman. Not as well-dressed as you, of course, but he looked the part he dared to play. Senator Garvin, a healthy man of 47 who couldn't keep his hands to himself, gave his driver a smile and a nod as he turned to the Hilton entrance. He walked inside to wait in line at the front desk. It wasn't long till everyone recognized who he was. Senator Andrew Garvin, the Republican candidate for President of the United States, flanked by Secret Service. Those in the front of the line stood starstruck as he entered. He batted away their awe with a cordial smile and commanded them to continue on with what they were doing. Much to his amusement, they all stepped out of his way, bending over backwards for him. It was intoxicating. He loved it, and he did his best to maintain the most humble attitude he could. After all, he would be elected president, and they would be under his thumb. Senator Garvin did not get into politics to help anyone. He got into politics because his father had, and his father before him. Garvin was as political a name as Kennedy. It was power his family craved. They had several funds set up for their family that accepted money from all over the world. A good portion from USAID as well. Taxpayer dollars. Oh Boy. As long as the Garvins continued to vote whichever way the money flowed, it kept flowing, despite the needs of the American people. Garvin received the information he needed from the cute blonde at the front. He left his card with her in case she was looking for an internship. He was always looking for new talent to help him get off. But now he had to focus on a deal at hand. He was meeting a very important fellow in room 1013, Jameson Burr, deputy director of Stanson Lee Financial, one of the leading contributors of both parties. Because why have principles when you could own a president? Is your commentary necessary? Is yours? Garvin walked down the main hallway to the elevator and proceeded to the 10th floor. He was late. It isn't prudent to keep Stanson Lee waiting, not with an election on the line. He arrived on the 10th floor and hurried to room 1013. Secret Service stood at the door as he knocked, and immediately the door opened to reveal a stern, stone-cold face of Jameson Burr. Short, combed blonde head with gold metal wire glasses that didn't slide down your nose, like the commoner glasses, though he still instinctively pushed them up in place, probably a habit he maintained as a child before becoming Stanson Lee employee. You're late. He ushered Garvin into the room. It was a dimly lit suite with a bed blanket covering the windows. Senator Davis, a mild African American statesman running against Garvin, stood up to greet them. They shook hands and embraced with a couple of shoulder pats like old friends do. What kept you? Blonde, brunette, or redhead? Davis winked. Garvin chuckled. Well, you know. Gentlemen, I'd like to conduct our business quickly. We're behind schedule. Senator Garvin, did anyone see you on your way in? Garvin frowned. Several, including hotel staff. Burr sighed. These meetings are important so that we all get what we want. Hardiness will not be tolerated unless you want the withdrawal of Stanson Lee. One news conference would put Stanson Lee under fire, wouldn't it? Garvin smiled, that white, perfect smile that won elections. Burr smiled. We own several news agencies. Nothing is printed or televised without the scrutiny of our people. Why do you think these procedures have gone on this long? You're not the first Republican we've owned. Davis laughed a low, breathy laugh. He was an older, distinguished gentleman who had been a Democratic senator for most of his life. He hadn't contributed much except a lot of pot stirring. It was easy to point the finger at others and rally the have-nots to your cause. Davis was an expert at it. He took a seat in a plush, straight-backed chair. Garvin did the same. Gentlemen, Burr picked up 2 packets of paper from his open briefcase, which he laid open on the wooden table in the center of the room. These are your contracts. Stanson Lee are backing both of you for the next 4 years. One of you will be president, the other will be a senator. Both roles are paramount for Stanson Lee's future. The contract outlines your obligations to Stanson Lee. Upon receiving your deposits of $100 million each, you will henceforth make your decisions on our behalf. If we want a certain bill passed, make it happen. He handed the contracts to the senators. What happens when we can't get our fellow party members to cooperate? Senator Davis put on his reading glasses as he looked over the paperwork. Are we out $100 million? Stanson Lee requires the utmost cooperation. If any members have a hard time seeing our vision, let us know, and we'll take care of it. Davis nodded and smiled. A lot more where that came from, huh? Senator Davis, all your needs will be met as long as you meet ours. We may require some greasing of wheels and hammering of nails if you catch my drift. I read you, he laughed as he pulled out a pen from his pocket and signed his contract. Senator Garvin did the same. Now, whichever one of you is president, we will need you to steer the national conversation in the direction that best suits us. Never mind what you promised your voters. They'll be disappointed, but you'll have to convince them that you know best. Don't we always? Smiled Senator Garvin. Senator Davis laughed. And the opposing party will call out the ruling party's ideas as racist, sexist, or whatever rhetoric that fits best at the time. Senator Davis continued. Don't worry, Mr. Burr. We've been in this business longer than you've been walking. And we'll continue to run this business, Senator Garvin clapped Senator Davis on the back. They handed their contracts to Mr. Burr, and he placed them into his open briefcase. He smiled. These guys didn't need coaching. They were pros. There's absolutely nothing to worry about. The window broke, and the sound of glass shattered as it struck the blanket covering. It sounded like an ice cube hitting the hardwood floor. Burr jumped when he heard it and gazed at the window to see a quarter-sized hole of light peering through the blanket. Senator Davis let out a hoarse scream. Burr turned his head to see Senator Garvin was face down into the white carpet, a gaping hole in his head. Then another crash. Burr ducked down, but Senator Davis was too slow. He fell to the floor, but Burr could tell that another object had came flying through the window, striking Senator Davis straight through the skull. A bullet? Open up! Secret Service banged on the doors. Blood pooled beneath the senators' bodies, soaking into the white carpet. How? Thought Burr. We're on the 10th floor. There are no other buildings around to snipe from. And how could anyone see them from through the blanket? Burr crouched on the balls of his feet. Two holes of light peered through the blanket, and more. There was a man standing on the balcony. Burr yelped. He had to get to the door. The Secret Service would save him. And then he needed to escape, far away, where no one could find him. Not only to escape this menace, but to avoid being in the news with two dead presidential candidates. The man punched through the glass and opened the door. The wind from outside ballooned the blanket for him to step inside the room. Burr grabbed his briefcase and stumbled towards the door. The banging grew louder, and he fumbled with the lock to open it. The agents took one step into the room and collapsed. Burr tried to jump over them, but the man reached out and grabbed the collar of his shirt and flung him to the ground. Burr hit his head on the soft carpet with a thud. Dazed, he looked up at the man. He wore some sort of military-style suit of armor and a hard mask and helmet. The suit looked more like sports padding than anything else, sturdier, but at the same time it looked like it breathed, without any limitations, flexible as if it were non-existent. The mask was attached to a helmet much like a motorcycle helmet, but with some sort of electronic display showing a smiley face of LED lights. He held an M24 sniper rifle in his hands, his fingers just outside the trigger well. Even through the mask, Burr could tell his eyes were locked on him. It was an unsettling feeling, as if this man could read his thoughts and stood above him in judgment. He spoke, raspy with a voice modulator. Hello, Mr. Burr. You don't know me, but I've been learning a lot about you. Mr. Burr quaked as he tried to string a coherent line of words together. Hush. I wish you could help me, Burr. I really do. I've been doing research on you, on Stanson Lee, on the two senators over there. I've come to some conclusions. One, you represent Stanson Lee, but Stanson Lee represents something else. A mystery I'm hoping to solve. Number two, those senators are just the beginning. I'm going to clean things up. Make things the way they should be. Burr shivered on the ground, his briefcase covering his chest. The man sighed. I'm sorry I'm a bit dramatic. Maybe you can help me. I'm going to kill you,
and in so doing, a path will be laid out before me. Will I proceed down it, or give up on this mission?
He pointed the muzzle at the center of Burr's head and squeezed the trigger.
Oh, no, you couldn't help me. The path was already laid, and we were just passing ships.
He pulled the remaining agents into the room and slid the Do Not Disturb sign on the door.
To be honest, there is no helping me. Or rather, help is on the way. Foggy. The fog will lift soon.
He pulled the briefcase out of Burr's hand and walked out the door. On his way to the elevator, he saw a housekeeper pushing her cart. She saw Jameson Burr tip his hat and disappear into the elevator.